The first thing the trapper noticed was the silence. No birds, no wind, just the heavy stillness of the mountains holding their breath. Then he saw her, a small figure crumpled in the dirt like a discarded doll, her dress torn, her bare feet scraped raw. She wasn't moving. For a terrible second he thought he was too late. But then a faint rise of her chest. She was alive. Barely. The sun hung low over the Montana wilderness, painting the rocks in shades of gold and rust. Tom Harrow, a grizzled trapper with a beard like tangled wire, trudged along the narrow mining trail, his boots kicking up dust. He wasn't a man given to fanciful thoughts, but something in the air felt wrong. Too quiet. Even the crickets had gone still. Then he saw it, a flash of faded blue against the brown earth. He squinted, stepping closer. A girl. She lay half hidden in the gully, one arm twisted beneath her, her dark hair matted with dirt. Her dress, once maybe a pretty calico, was ripped at the shoulders, and her feet, Tom sucked in a breath. They were cut and bruised as if she'd run for miles over sharp stones. "Hey there," he called softly, not expecting an answer. She didn't move. Tom crouched beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her throat. A pulse, weak but steady. Relief washed over him. He shrugged off his coat, wrapping it around her thin shoulders. She was light as kindling when he lifted her, her head lolling against his arm. "Hold on now," he muttered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "We're getting you help." The mining town of Iron Creek wasn't much, just a row of rough wooden buildings, a saloon, and a sheriff's office that doubled as a jail. But it had a doctor, and that was enough. Tom carried the girl straight to Doc Henderson's place, ignoring the stares of the townsfolk who stopped to gawk. Doc Henderson, a tired man with spectacles perched on his nose, examined her in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was grim. "Dehydrated. Malnourished. Feet are a mess. And look here," he pointed to her throat. Faint bruises circled it, like fingers had dug into her skin. "Who'd do that to a child?" Tom growled. The doc shook his head. "Worse, she ain't said a word. Not even a whimper when I touched her wounds. Trauma like this, sometimes the mind shuts down to survive." By sundown, the whole town knew about the girl. Whispered theories spread like wildfire. "Ran away from a circus," said the mercantile owner, counting his coins. "Seen it before. Freak shows toss out the ones who don't draw crowds." "Or an outlaw's brat," argued a miner, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "Left behind when the law got too close." The sheriff, a practical man with no patience for mysteries, rubbed his forehead. "County orphanage'll take her. We ain't equipped for strays." But the orphanage was 3 days' ride, and the girl was in no shape to travel. So for now, she stayed in the doc's back room, curled up like a wounded animal, her eyes blank as a winter sky. No one knew her name. No one knew if she even remembered it. And no one, not even Tom, guessed that the quiet girl with the bruised throat would change the town forever. The girl from the gully was the talk of Iron Creek. By morning, half the town had found an excuse to pass by Doc Henderson's place, peering through the window like she was some strange exhibit. Clara Bennett watched them from the shadow of her sewing shop, her fingers absently tracing the edge of a half-finished dress. She knew what it was to be stared at. 2 years ago they had looked at her the same way, widowed too young, child buried too soon. The town had whispered then too. Poor Clara. All alone now. What will she do? She set down her scissors. Outside, the sheriff was leading the girl down the dusty street, his grip firm but not unkind. The girl moved like a sleepwalker, her bare feet wrapped in bandages, her eyes fixed on the ground. The church ladies clustered near the steps of the chapel, their faces pinched with worry. "We can't take in every stray," Mrs. Wilkins said, shaking her head. "What if she's simple-minded? Or worse?" Clara's chest tightened. She remembered the way they had murmured over her daughter's coffin. Such a shame. So young. Before she could think better of it, she pushed open her shop door and stepped into the sunlight. "I'll take her." The chatter stopped. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "You sure, Mrs. Bennett? She ain't much for talking." Clara didn't look at him. She looked at the girl, at the way her shoulders trembled, at the way her fingers clutched the sheriff's sleeve like she was afraid the earth would swallow her whole. "I'm sure," Clara said. That night, in the quiet of her cabin, Clara cleaned the girl's wounds with gentle hands. The girl didn't cry, didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. But when Clara smoothed salve over the cuts on her feet, she saw the girl's breath hitch, just once, before she locked herself away again. Clara set aside the bandages. "You need a name," she said softly. "Can't just call you girl forever." The girl didn't respond. Clara reached for the quilt folded at the foot of the bed, one she had stitched years ago, tiny flowers embroidered along the edges. She draped it over the girl's thin shoulders. "Hope," Clara said. "Your name is Hope now." For the first time the girl looked up. Her eyes were dark, endless. She didn't nod, didn't smile. But she didn't pull away either. Days turned into weeks and Hope stayed silent. She followed Clara like a shadow, always a step behind, never speaking. She ate when food was given, slept when told, but her eyes were always watching, always wary. Clara found crumbs under her pillow once, a handful of biscuit carefully hidden. "You don't have to save food," Clara said, keeping her voice light. "There's always enough." Hope stared at her, unblinking, then turned away. Clara tried not to let it hurt. She had known this would be hard. But sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, she caught herself wishing for just one word. Just one sign that the girl understood she was safe now. Then one morning Clara found the drawing. It was scratched into the cabin wall near Hope's cot, faint but unmistakable, a wagon with bars across its windows. Beside it, a stick figure with its arms raised as if trapped inside. Clara's breath caught. She traced the lines with her fingers, her heart pounding. It wasn't just the child's doodle. It was a memory. She didn't mention it to Hope. But that afternoon she traded her best sewing scissors to the miner's supply post for a packet of drawing pencils. When she set them on Hope's cot, the girl froze. For a long moment she just stared, as if waiting for Clara to snatch them away. Then slowly she reached out and took one. That night, Clara found the first real drawing under Hope's pillow, a man with a whip, his face twisted in a snarl. The next morning there was another. A bird in a cage. And the morning after that, a woman's face, blurred as if by tears. Clara didn't speak of those either. But she tucked each one carefully into her sewing box, her throat tight. Meanwhile, the town's whispers grew louder. Mrs. Greeley from the mercantile sniffed when Clara walked by with Hope. "That child's trouble," she said, just loud enough to be heard. "Mark my words." Clara tightened her grip on Hope's hand and kept walking. Hope didn't react. But that night, Clara found another drawing. This time, a woman with a kind face holding a needle and thread. And beneath it, a single word, shaky but clear. Clara. The pencils changed everything. Before, Hope had been a ghost in Clara's cabin, silent, watchful, disappearing into corners. But now she left traces of herself everywhere. Sketches appeared like secret gifts, under the pillow, tucked into Clara's sewing basket, even scratched into the frost on the window at dawn. Clara never rushed her. She'd simply nod when she found a new drawing, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world to discover a picture of a cross by a river, or a chain snapped in two. But her hands shook the day she unfolded a crumpled sketch from the pocket of Hope's apron, a detailed face this time. A woman with hollow cheeks and a faded scar above her eyebrow. The pencil strokes were frantic, dark. Someone real. Reverend Pike stopped by that afternoon, his Bible tucked under his arm. He'd heard the talk, he said. Wanted to see the wild child for himself. Hope vanished into the loft the moment he stepped inside. Clara served tea, her voice steady. She's shy. The Reverend's eyes lingered on the wall near the hearth, where Hope's latest drawing hung, pinned beside a sampler Clara's daughter had stitched years ago. It showed a flock of birds bursting from an open cage, their wings smudged as if in motion. Did she? He trailed off, uneasy. Clara stirred honey into her cup. She draws what she remembers. A floorboard creaked overhead. The Reverend left soon after, but not before murmuring, "That's no ordinary child's hand. That's a testimony." Winter tightened its grip on Iron Creek. At night, the wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls, and Clara would wake to find Hope's cot empty, only to spot her curled by the hearth, redrawing the same scenes over and over, as if trying to erase them from her mind. One morning, Clara set her own grief on the table between them, a half-finished quilt, its patches fraying at the edges. Her daughter's last project. Hope stared. "I never could finish it," Clara admitted. Her thumb brushed a tiny crooked stitch. Sarah was learning. Her hands were so small. A log shifted in the fire. The thread. The word hung in the air, fragile as a cobweb. Clara froze. Hope's lips parted again, testing the shape of the syllables like unfamiliar coins. Dish thread. Clara's vision blurred. She pushed the mending basket forward without a word. That afternoon they sat hip to hip, their needles flashing in tandem. Hope's stitches were clumsy at first, but she unpicked them without frustration and tried again. Outside, the sheriff's boots crunched on the icy path. "Clara." His knock rattled the door. "There's a man in town asking about a stolen investment." Hope's needles slipped, drawing blood. The air in Iron Creek turned sharp as a knife's edge the day Dillard rode into town. He was a tall man with a hat pulled low over his eyes, his coat too fine for a mining settlement. His boots kicked up dust as he strode straight to the sheriff's office, a leather-bound paper clutched in one gloved hand. Clara heard the news from the blacksmith's wife, who came breathless to her door. "There's a man saying that girl belongs to him," she whispered, her eyes darting to where Hope sat by the fire, her hands frozen over a half-mended shirt. Clara's stomach twisted, but she kept her voice calm. "Hope, stay inside." The girl didn't nod, but her fingers curled tight around the fabric in her lap. By the time Clara reached the sheriff's office, a crowd had gathered. Dillard stood on the porch, his voice carrying like a preacher's. "Indentured servant," he declared, shaking the paper in the air. "Signed and legal. Ran off from her rightful owner a month ago." Clara stepped forward. "She's a child." Dillard's smile didn't reach his eyes. 12 years old and worth every penny I paid for her." He turned to the crowd. "She's a drawing prodigy. Made her owner good money in his exhibitions." A murmur ran through the crowd. Clara felt sick. She knew what kind of exhibitions traveled the frontier, freak shows where oddities were gawked at like zoo animals. Then Dillard did something worse. He pulled a whip from his saddlebag and snapped it in the air. The crack echoed off the buildings like gunfire. From inside the sheriff's office, a crash sounded, a chair overturning. Then silence. Every head turned toward the noise. Hope stood in the doorway, her face white as fresh linen. Her whole body trembled, but her eyes were locked on Dillard. "There's my little artist," Dillard crooned. He held out a hand. "Time to go home." Hope didn't move. Clara planted herself between them. "She's not going anywhere." The sheriff rubbed his temples. "Clara, if the papers are legal." "Legal doesn't make it right," Clara shot back. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some looked away. Others muttered about property and contracts. Only the blacksmith, a hulking man with soot-stained hands, folded his arms and stared hard at Dillard. Dillard's smile faded. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said softly. "With the law." That night, Clara barred the door and checked the windows twice. Hope didn't sleep. She sat at the table, her pencil flying across paper until dawn. By morning, the whole town knew. The church bell rang, calling folks not to worship, but to a meeting. Clara dressed carefully, her back straight. Hope hovered near the door, clutching a rolled-up paper to her chest. "You don't have to come," Clara said gently. Hope shook her head. Her knuckles were white. The church was packed. Reverend Pike stood at the pulpit, his face grave. Dillard lounged in the front pew, his boots propped on the hymnal rack. "We must decide," the Reverend began, "what is just." The room erupted. "We can't harbor runaways," shouted the mercantile owner. "Next thing, every outlaw in Montana will dump their brats here." "She's a person, not stray livestock," the blacksmith's wife fired back. "What would Christ do?" called an elderly woman from the back. Dillard smirked. "Christ paid his taxes." Clara's hands clenched. But before she could speak, Hope moved. The girl slipped from her seat and darted out the side door. Clara followed, her heart pounding. She found Hope by the creek on her knees in the mud. Her hands clawed at the dirt, shaping furious lines, wagons, cages, a whip raised high. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Clara knelt beside her. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and gently wiped the mud from Hope's fingers. "You don't have to show them," Clara murmured. "Not if you're not ready." Hope's shoulders slumped. But when Clara turned to go, the girl caught her sleeve. She unrolled the paper she'd been carrying. It was a drawing larger than any before. A detailed scene, a barred wagon, children huddled inside. A man with a whip. And in the corner, a tiny figure escaping into tall grass. Hope pointed to that figure, then to herself. Clara's throat tightened. She folded the girl into her arms. That night, by lamplight, Clara read aloud from the Bible, "Fear not, for I have redeemed you, I have called you by name." Hope listened, her eyes on the flames. Then she reached for her pencil. Outside the wind howled. Somewhere in the dark, Dillard waited. The first rock shattered Clara's shop window just past midnight. Clara jerked upright in bed, the crash still ringing in her ears. Beside her, Hope was already on her feet, her body rigid as a bowstring. Outside, boots scuffed in the dirt and a low voice growled, "Last chance, widow. Hand her over by dawn or we burn you out." Clara's pulse hammered in her throat, but she forced her voice steady. "That you, Dillard? Men don't hide in shadows when they've got the law on their side." Pause. Then laughter, cold and humorless. "Law's asleep. But come morning, that sheriff will stand aside when I take what's mine." The footsteps retreated. Hope's hands trembled as she lit the lantern, its glow revealing the jagged rock on the floor, a scrap of paper tied around it. Clara unfolded it with numb fingers. Deadline, sunrise. Hope moved first. She snatched her drawings from under the bed and thrust them into Clara's hands, then began stuffing clothes into a flour sack. Clara caught her wrist. "No." Hope's eyes flashed, wild, desperate. "This is your home," Clara said, squeezing her hand. "We don't run." She hauled the washtub inside, filling it with water from the rain barrel. Hope understood at once, grabbing every bucket and pot to line the walls. They worked in silence, dousing the curtains, moving the quilts to the root cellar. As Clara wedged a chair under the doorknob, a new sound made her freeze, a rhythmic thump from the porch. Through the cracked shutter, she saw Old Man Ritter, the town drunk, perched on the steps with his Civil War rifle across his lap. He took a swig from his flask and muttered to the dark, "Not on my watch." Dawn came bloody and slow. The town held its breath. Women pulled children inside. Miners lingered near the saloon, pickaxes leaning against their legs like rifles. Clara stood on the porch, her apron pockets weighted with her dead husband's revolver. Unloaded, but Dillard didn't know that. Hope tugged her sleeve. The girl held a large sheet of paper, her fingers smudged with charcoal. Her eyes said everything. "Let me try." Clara hesitated, then nodded. Hope stepped into the street alone. The morning sun caught the edges of her tattered dress as she unrolled the drawing high above her head, a panorama of horror. A wagon with barred windows, children crammed inside like livestock. A man with Dillard's hat cracking a whip over a girl drawing in the dirt. And in the corner, a ledger with names and prices. The crowd surged forward to see. Gasps rippled through them. Dillard lunged. "Lies." The blacksmith blocked him with a forearm to the chest. "This your contract work?" He pointed to the whip marks rendered in brutal detail. Reverend Pike pushed through, his face ashen. He studied the drawing, then turned to Dillard. "This is slavery." Dillard's hand flew to his pistol, but the sheriff was faster, stepping between them with a raised palm. "Enough. You want to press claims, do it in court. But that child's staying put." For a heartbeat, the town teetered on violence. Then Old Man Ritter spat in the dirt. "Ain't no court gonna side with a man who brands kids." He jerked his chin at the drawing, where a faint scar curled around the wrist of the smallest captive. Dillard's jaw worked. He scanned the crowd, the blacksmith's clenched fists, the reverend's icy glare, the women clutching their aprons like battle flags. With a snarl, he mounted his horse. "This ain't over." As he rode out, Hope didn't cheer. She just folded the drawing carefully and pressed it into Clara's hands. The paper was still warm from her grip. The fireflies blinked lazily over the creek as darkness fell, their tiny lights the only sign of peace in Iron Creek that night. Inside the cabin, Clara checked the window latches for the third time, her fingers brushing the grooves where Hope's drawings had once been hidden. They were safe now, rolled tight and tucked into the stove's cold belly, where no flame could reach them. Hope sat at the table, her pencil moving steadily across a fresh sheet. This drawing was different. No cages, no whips. Just a single lantern glowing in a sea of black, its light stretching toward the edges of the page like reaching hands. Clara didn't ask. She simply set a mug of chamomile tea beside the girl and took up her post by the door, her ear tuned to the night sounds. The attack came quietly. No shouted threats this time, just the creak of saddle leather and the soft crunch of boots on gravel. Clara peered through the shutter slats and saw them. Dillard and two rough-looking men, their faces half hidden by bandanas. One carried a coiled rope, the other a torch. Her breath caught. She reached blindly behind her, finding Hope's shoulder. Root cellar. Now. Hope shook her head, her fingers curling around Clara's wrist. A floorboard groaned on the porch. "The evenin', gents." Old Man Ritter's voice, slurred but sharp, cut through the dark. He leaned against the hitching post, his rifle propped carelessly over one shoulder. Behind him, shapes emerged from the shadows. The blacksmith with a hammer, the mercantile owner's wife with a cast-iron skillet, miners holding lanterns that threw long, jagged shadows. Dillard froze. "This don't concern you." The blacksmith stepped forward. "Funny. We figured it did." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the torchbearer lunged, just as the sheriff's whistle pierced the air. "Hold it right there." The crowd parted as the sheriff marched up, his badge catching the lantern light. He yanked down the bandana of the man with the rope, revealing a wanted poster face. "Well, look who came back for supper." Dillard's eyes darted to the cabin window, where Hope's pale face hovered like a ghost. Rage twisted his features. "She's worth $50. The sheriff snapped cuffs on his wrists. "And you're worth 20 for attempted arson. Let's go." As they led him away, the townspeople lingered, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies around Clara's porch. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Spring came gentle that year. The creek swelled with snowmelt, its waters rushing clear over the stones where Hope had once scrubbed her skin raw. Now she stood on the bank in a simple white dress Clara had stitched for this day, her hair braided with wildflowers. The whole town had gathered. Even Mrs. Greeley from the mercantile clutched a hymn book, though she didn't sing. Reverend Pike waded into the shallows, his sleeves rolled up. "Hope Bennett," he called, his voice carrying over the babble of the water. "Do you choose this new life?" Hope's bare toes curled in the mud. For a moment, Clara feared she'd bolt, but then the girl lifted her chin and stepped forward. The creek was cold. Hope gasped as the water reached her waist, but she didn't hesitate when the Reverend raised his hand. "In the name of the Father, the Son." The dunk was quick. Hope surfaced spluttering, her dress plastered to her skin, her laughter ringing out as bright as the sunlight on the water. The crowd cheered. Clara didn't realize she was crying until Hope splashed toward her, holding out something, a smooth river stone with a single word carved into it. Family. That night, by firelight, Hope presented her final drawing. Not a nightmare, but a vision. Her old cage transformed into a cross, its door hanging open. And beside it, Clara, not as the widow the town pitied, but as a woman with her hands outstretched, her face turned toward the light. A year had turned since the creek's waters had washed away Hope's old life. The cabin that once felt too big for just Clara now hummed with activity. The scrape of pencils on paper, the rustle of pages turning, the occasional burst of laughter that still made Clara's heart skip. Hope sat at the kitchen table, her tongue peeking out in concentration as she wrapped a thick bundle of papers in brown paper and twine. Clara watched from her rocking chair, her mending forgotten in her lap. "Who's it for again?" she asked, though she already knew. Hope didn't look up as she carefully printed the address. "Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker," Chicago Home for Foundling Children. The lady who writes the newspaper stories about missing kids, she said. Her voice was clear now, though she still chose her words like rare stones. The bundle held copies of her drawings, not the nightmares but careful diagrams. How to spot a barred wagon disguised as a merchant cart. The hidden compartments where children might be stowed. The particular way some men held their whips like they were proud of them. Clara's throat tightened. She thought of the first sketch she'd ever found, that crude wagon scratched on her wall. Now that same hand was drawing maps to freedom for others. A knock at the door broke her reverie. Maggie Carter stood on the porch, her 7-year-old daughter Lucy hiding behind her skirts. The girl's arms were littered with fading bruises. "Hope," Maggie said softly, "Lucy won't talk about the men who hurt her mama." But the sheriff found this under her bed. She held out a child's drawing, a house with black X's for windows. Hope knelt until she was eye level with Lucy. She didn't ask questions. Just pulled a fresh sheet of paper from her pocket and laid it beside the girl's trembling drawing. Then she began to sketch, slowly, deliberately, a tree with sprawling branches. Lucy's breath hitched. After a long moment, she reached out and added a swing to the tree. Clara turned away to put the kettle on. Through the window, she saw Hope and Lucy sitting cross-legged in the grass, their heads bent over shared paper as the afternoon light turned gold. That evening, Clara lingered on the porch as fireflies sparked in the lavender dusk. Hope joined her, smelling of pencil lead and the peppermint candy she'd shared with Lucy. "You did good today," Clara said. Hope leaned against her shoulder, the way Clara's daughter used to. "We did good," she corrected. Inside, pinned above Clara's sewing table, Hope's newest drawing caught the last of the light. A mother and daughter, their faces clear, their hands unbroken. If this story of courage and quiet resilience spoke to you, I invite you to share this tale with someone who needs a reminder that broken beginnings can bloom into beautiful futures. Leave a comment about which moment touched you most. Was it Hope's first whispered word, the lantern vigil, or her baptism in the creek? Subscribe for more stories where light triumphs over darkness in unexpected ways. Just as Hope's drawings became beacons of hope, your engagement helps spread more light in the world. Which frontier story should we tell next? The choice could be yours. Thank you for journeying with us to Iron Creek. Remember, sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power.